Good evening and welcome. We are here at the University of Surrey to talk all about game audio technology today on behalf of Criterion Games, who we're here with, and with the Audio Engineering Society. My name is Alexander Horowitz. I'm the audio director at Criterion Games here in Guildford in the UK, and I'm joined here by 4 of the Criterion audio team. So what we'll do, I think, is let's go around and maybe do some introductions. And I have a whole host of questions about game audio technology, what it means to us all, and what we think the past, the present, and the future have held and might hold going forward. So, Adam, why don't we start with you? Maybe you could tell us who you are, what you do at Criterion, and generally what your role is within game audio technology.
Okay, yes, so I'm Adam Philp, and I am an audio software engineer at Criterion Games. And being an audio software engineer means I write code for games that both in the runtime of games and that makes tools for sound designers to use in order for them to implement sound. And my career in doing that goes back a very long way because I'm incredibly old. So I grew, when I was at school, you had the first computers in school regularly, like ZX Spectrums and BBC Micros back in the 1980s. And then when I left school, I got my first job working for a part of EMI Music. They had a research and development department, so I was doing research and development into spatial sound reproduction and recording in the early 1990s. So anyone who's a fan of binaural sound and knows about dummy heads and all of that kind of thing, I was playing around with those. That was to do music recording and reproduction. But then around the mid-90s, Microsoft created Direct Sound 3D, which allowed you to have a way of telling your game where you wanted your sounds positioned in space. So we repurposed our technology to support that, and eventually we were selling technology to position sounds around you on speakers and headphones to computer game manufacturers and sound card manufacturers. We eventually had the 3D sound technology in the original Xbox. After that, we made what would now be called game audio middleware, and this was in the era of the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube, and eventually, having done more work with computer games companies, I ended up being employed by a computer games company, which was EA in Guildford at the time, making Harry Potter games and less exciting games like Family Game Night and Trivial Pursuit. And then I worked for Lionhead up the road on Fable 3, and then eventually I moved to Canada and worked for BioWare for a few years on Dragon Age Inquisition and Mass Effect Andromeda. Then I came back here in 2016, and since then I've been working first for Codemasters in Cheshire, making various driving games, and then eventually for Criterion, also making driving games, Need for Speed, and now work on Battlefield.
What I love about that story there is it's basically a what's what of consoles and places and technologies. It's fantastic.
Indeed. I'm old enough to remember when computers making any kind of sound was amazing, and I was amazed by that, even as a kid. And so, in a way, although I didn't go, I'm going to be a game audio person, it's sort of a bit like having a dream job, because I didn't really think that you could get a job doing this, and then eventually it turned out that you could.
I think I'm going to touch on the difference between what was there, the delta between what you started with and what we have now in a bit. But before I do, we'll get on to Sean. Sean.
Yeah, my story isn't quite as long or exciting as Adam's, but I got into game audio in 2020 and joined Adam at Codemasters. My route into I'm an audio programmer, by the way, so same as Adam. I write code for audio runtime and tool stuff. Yeah, my route into it was actually via sound technology. So I did like a BTech and a degree in sound technology. Wanted to go into recording for film and TV. Did some Foley, did editing and sound design. And then kind of found that wasn't for me. I didn't really like it so much, and then started to look at game audio, got really into implementation, and then just decided to learn C++ and took a few years out doing various other things, working in bars and that kind of stuff, you know, teaching myself to code, and then eventually found my way into Codemasters in 2020, worked on Dirt 5, WRC.
That's World Rally Championship.
Yes, World Rally Championship. And then on to Need for Speed and now Battlefield.
You said as well you found yourself in those positions. Do you feel it's like what Adam was saying, this idea of, I never intended for this to be the case, and then here I am working on World Rally Championship and all of these other titles?
I think I just kind of followed the fun. I followed the thing that I wanted to do most, mainly. And then, yeah, you just kind of talk to people in it and then, you know, form relationships, and those relationships and the skills that you've built by following the fun just kind of bring you to these places, I think, really. That's how I've found myself sitting where I am now.
I like that human element as well, that idea. When you say relationships, you mean working with other developers and other disciplines within the art, right?
Oh yeah, totally. And the people that you meet in university will open doors for you, and the people you meet at events that you go to and meet and greets and all these kinds of things, those are the kind of things that are going to open doors for you in the industry and give you ideas about the things that you might want to do as well, I think.
Wonderful, great stuff. Moving on to Isaac. Hello.
Hello, my name's Isaac. I'm a software engineer intern at Criterion, in the audio team. So I work with Sean and Adam, doing similar things, working on the engine and tools. I'm doing the internship as part of my degree here at Surrey Uni, on the Tom Meister course. So I've been here the last year, and I've just carried on over this summer before I go back to my final year.
It's wonderful to be in your place as well. The fact we're obviously here at Surrey, in part due to your connection, but also the fact that you have the University of Surrey here with a long-established Tom Meister program, and then you becoming this bridge, in a sense, between the student cohort that you are part of here, but also the professional cohort that you are part of with us. And we feel like you're one of us, and I imagine the Surrey student cohort probably feel like you're one of them. There's this strange bridge in between, which I suppose you probably feel like you're moving towards that professional world more and more. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, even though it's been a year, it's been so welcoming at Criterion, and it's been you get stuck in right away, and it's like you've been there forever, really. There's no. Even though it's an internship, there's no like student tasks or things. It's real work. So it's getting stuck into the professional world very quickly, which is an advantage of doing a placement year like that.
I think we've also got too much we want to get done, of course, as well, to have you making teas for a year, and you're far too valuable as well for that. So thank you.
Also, it's a long train journey for you to bring your light
up to Manchester and back. And finally, Gaetan.
Hello, I'm Gaetan Lourmiere. I've been working for Criterion for 3 years almost now. I actually didn't start my audio career in games. I actually started working in sound design and for multiple studios, and doing also interview, field recordings, mixing, and freelancing. I lived in Shanghai for 10 years, so that's where I started my career and where I joined EA. I joined EA in Shanghai, I think in 2019, and then I moved as a sound designer at the time, and I moved to Criterion to become a technical sound designer. It's something that I've always gravitated toward, and that means I'm kind of in between software engineers and sound designers. So I don't do much sound design anymore, but I help sound designer a lot to implement their sounds and all these kind of things.
Could you say you're the glue in a sense, or do you feel like you're a separate thing altogether?
I don't know, it's not really for me to say, but I think it's, I kind of help bridge the gap of some of the tools that can be quite heavy and have a big ramp up to use, and try to transfer that knowledge to some designers so they can test their things and implement their audio in the game by themselves as much as possible.
And you do it very well.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. This isn't really about me, but just in terms of my background, I've been an audio director or head of audio for about 8, 9 years now. I've been at Criterion only for a few months now. It's been 4 months or so now. Must be going well. We've all been getting on, hopefully. And I was on... Say again?
As long as you buy the drinks.
I will buy you a drink after this, absolutely. Before this, I was doing a bunch of various things. I was on Hogwarts Legacy for about 5 years, handling the European audio team. I was the head of audio for Andy Serkis's mocap. There was a games division of the mocap company called Imaginarium. Imaginati was the games division working on Planet of the Apes games. And somewhere in there, my PhD was in game accessibility and some music games, accessible music games for children with complex needs. But anyway, enough about me. So coming back, or starting in earnest on game audio technology then, what does game audio technology mean to you? Using this term and framing this event and this panel as that topic, it's very broad. And so what do we mean, what do you mean when we say game audio technology? Perhaps, Gaetan, we can come back to you.
Yeah, sure. I think, as you mentioned, it's a very broad term, and if you ask different people, you will have very different answers. I think game audio technology kind of touches everything from even the way you can capture or create certain sounds in software to the tool that will make it easier for you to deal with a lot of data at the same time, to actually implementing and the way those sounds will be played back in your engine, so through all the reverb systems, through whatever it might be. Yeah, and different audio formats. It's a very, for me, it really goes from the beginning to the end of the pipeline for game audio.
How much of that view do you think is shaped by your role? I said there, are you the glue, are you something else? How much do you think the work that you do actually shapes how you view what that is?
I think probably a lot, and probably also the fact that I didn't start as a technical designer, and I've also done quite a bit of sound design, and then through sound design I kind of started to create tools to make my life easier, really, and facilitate the repetitive task I had to do. So that's why I also really see it as much the tool that won't make it into your game at the end, as much as measuring the performance of your game and having really good reverb system in your game, for example.
Absolutely, yeah. And so then, to come across to Adam, the idea you came from a creative or an asset creating background, moving into more and more technical things. Now, I know you've got a background in music and recording and other things that would be dubbed as creative arts as well, but I know that the work you do now is quite technical and quite code-based. Mm-hmm. So what about your view on game audio technology? What does that mean to you? Does that align with Gaetan's experiences?
It does very much align with Gaetan's experience, but whenever I think about what game audio technology is, I always think about having started in, before really sort of game audio software engineer was a specialist career you could have. And people asked me, when I first got a job like that, and people asked me what my job was, and I said, I'm an audio programmer. And they said, oh, you write the music for computer games then, do you? So people, they got the impression that actually the sound in a computer game is, certainly to quite a lot of people I talk to, they almost feel like it's something that just happens. Like, like it's like as you play a CD and the sound comes out, and you play the game and the sound comes out. But there is an awful lot of different elements that are required to create the audio experience that you get at the end. And those elements are all constantly evolving, whether that's the platforms, the bits of, the hardware, the consoles, the computers, the phones, the whatever it might be that the game actually runs on and that you play it on, and the bits of that it either come with it or are connected to that you hear the sound through, or the capabilities of that platform in terms of how, what can its hardware do, and what software can you write for it to do things, and what tools can you create with software to give people who actually think about sound in terms of creating sounds from an, if you like, from an artistic way of an artistic approach to what sounds you would like to have in your game. How do you create tools, and what are those tools that you give them to make those sounds happen and to fit them all into the game so that you can effectively get as much sound, as much interesting sound, as much variety of sound, and as much quality of sound into that end product, which then also interact with what the game actually is, what it does, and tells you as a user what is going on in the game and creates feelings as you play the game. All of that stuff, from the software, the platforms, the tools, and everything else, all is game audio technology. And you know, in the 1980s, that was very simple, and now it's extremely complex, and there's an awful lot to it.
This perhaps jumps a couple of steps forward, but you mentioned there about the tools and all of the other technologies enabling creativity or enabling that ability to write the music, to play back sounds, to fit them all into the game. Do you think there's an inherent creativity in the creation of those tools as well?
I think there is. People tend to think of programming as you've got a problem and you've got your computer to solve it with code. And that is one of the things that programming is. But there are a variety of approaches you can take to building a piece of software that does something, whether it's playing the engine sounds in a racing game in such a way that they sound realistic and respond to what the player or the driver is doing in the game. And there is also a creative aspect in how you make a tool that allows someone to build the engine asset for that car in that game. You know, there's a creative aspect and there's a big working aspect and a relationship aspect. If I'm building a tool, I'm building it for someone possibly like Gaetan or possibly for a sound designer who may be less technical, who they have a vision of what sort of thing they would like to have. And the creative aspect comes largely from working with them to find out what that vision is in such a way that you can then bring it to life with your code. And you are bringing something to life with your code. So as well as being technical, it is also creative.
What I find interesting about that as well is you mentioned the fact you've been doing this for quite a long time and that the technology has changed, but it's still trying to achieve the same or similar outcomes in a sense. It's still trying to enable a certain type of experience. And I think to Isaac, who you've been in the industry a relatively short time and you've been training in some technologies that are older, things like I imagine Ambisonics comes up on your Tom Oyster program, perhaps I'm assuming, but that's quite an old technology. But then a lot of the things that we're doing in games are working on the most modern console. They're working with the most modern game engine a lot of the time. And it depends on, it doesn't necessarily depend on what you're trying to make. The technology will be the latest stuff. Do you feel that's shaped your view on what game audio is? This idea of coming in fresh and not having not necessarily the baggage, but also the experience of all of those things before?
Yeah, I suppose, as you said, game audio technology is often trying to achieve a similar thing throughout the whole time games have been a thing. But there's when I was thinking about some of the questions, I mean, the kind of amount with the game audio technology has improved throughout the years. Even from consoles from not that long ago, like the sound quality on a DS compared to a Nintendo Switch is huge, and the size of the sound assets you can use like gigabytes of audio, and the limitations have come away. I think is in a lot of senses due to hardware and software, and
It is interesting because I suppose what you're alluding to there, in a sense, this idea, well, the DS and to the Switch is what the X is to the Y a few generations back. And so we're all making these personal comparisons, and Adam's saying, well, this technology in the 80s, and then we moved forward 20 years, and of course, 2000 to 2020, the PS5 and the Xbox S and X now, looking forward in 20 years' time, it'll be a very different conversation in terms of the computational power of the hardware, but we'd probably talk about the same things, in essence.
One interesting thing that was interesting to me is you mentioned Ambisonics as being an old technology. there. And ambisonics is an old technology in the sense that, you know, I've read research papers on it from the 1970s. And when I was first getting involved in, you know, computers, sound and music as a job of some kind, I was going, oh, this ambisonics is great, this sounds fantastic. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually use computers to do it properly? And the computing power was not there to, you know, really make it something that could be, you know, available to a mass audience. But now here we are in 2024, and you know, Dolby Atmos is in cinemas, it's in TVs, it's in soundbars, it's in speakers, it's in games consoles, and it's based on basically the same kind of technology, the same ideas as ambisonics. So the latest, effectively the technological front line of you know, AAA and large-scale computer games now. One of those front lines is spatial audio, which is actually having been able to realize 50-year-old ideas and 50-year-old technologies with modern technology that makes it possible to produce it at a price that people can afford, and so you can build it into things. And so that is one of the things that we are all looking at now and is appearing in games now. And so for us, that's new technology, but it's for, if you're in a university department like here, it's old technology.
As a price you can afford as well is a big point, and I don't want to derail this too much in terms of the idea of VR, but of course if you look back at systems from 20 years ago, and even this idea of booms that have CRT monitors on them, that all the research papers are there talking about this amazing new innovative technology, but of course it seems so unwieldy and impractical, and in some cases very expensive. Is it the cave system I'm thinking of? This idea of the square with the projections all inside, and it's a very immersive environment by the standards of the time, but it's not exactly, you can't stick it on your head, and you can't ship it in a box to a consumer. Whereas now the idea of a Quest, are we on a Quest 2, Quest 3 now? I forget where we're up to in terms of the versions of these products, but a consumer can go and buy something, and the next day they can go and play something. Or same day even. Sean, I'm aware I haven't taken your take on game audio technology as a whole, but what does this align with what everyone else is saying here?
Yeah, I think the only thing I can really add is that I think that I look at this from two angles. I look at this from the angle of me naively looking at games before I really learned how they were made and how they were produced, and kind of looking at them through the lens of like experiences. And so, you know, taking experiences like, say, something like Dead Space versus something that's maybe more story driven, like a God of War game, versus something that's needs more informational audio, like, you know, a tactical shooter like Counter-Strike or something like that. These things demand very different technologies and demand you to think differently about the types of technologies you deliver and the way you deliver them. And I think just as much as the underlying like hardware and technologies and middleware available, those things can also pull the strings of how you need to think. And every game will demand something very different. And there are things that, you know, shared commonalities across them. You know, a reverb sounds like a reverb, and a room you're in will sound like a room you're in. And, you know, positional audio will always sound like it's coming from the same space, no matter what kind of experience you're making. But it's the things that you build on top of that, and the tools and the way you think about things can be shifted just by the type of experience that you're making. I think that's like an important one for me.
Fantastic, yeah. And again, so much of this seems to be about context, seems to be about the idea of what we make and what we're intending to do with the tools, with the technologies. I suppose personally, I always find it a bit concerning when we look at the technology for its own sake. Now, there are some incredible research projects that need to define standards, need to define technologies, need to define ways of creating hardware and software. But without the application, it becomes a bit, especially in our field, becomes a bit ethereal, where we're making things without any purpose, I suppose. Maybe I'm just grandstanding there, but that's my view on it anyway. So I wanted to move on to the idea of what are some of the biggest topics right now in game audio, some of the biggest developments that we're seeing come through now, maybe in the last few years up until the present day. And I guess the context for this is we all work with game audio technologies either in a more creative sense or a more technical sense every day, but I know some of the people who are listening to this here or on online and stream and things will be working in audio, but not necessarily in interactive audio even. And so what can we do basically to highlight the things that are happening right now? What are the big things? And anyone can take this.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think one thing with modern game consoles that come out as well is that we see more and more the audio capability being advertised as a selling point, which we see with the PS5 and the Tempest audio system, which is their audio engine, something they really want to push as like, we do audio well and we want to sell it. So I think that's great to see, because that really helps the technology to be pushed as well. I think there is a lot of change also in the way the player experience the games, with having now easier access to Atmos system, for example, through like having a height factor, where before the only option was to get speakers in your ceiling. Now even soundbar can do beaming by reflecting some of the sound up to the floor and back to you, and giving you a sense of things happening above you. But yeah, I think one of the biggest topic right now is probably around generative VO, and yeah, how, like, the obvious ethical problem that can cause as well, and what is a good use for it. There is a lot of potential and a lot of power of how it can help making better game and making more immersive experience. But I think everybody is still trying to find how to use it in an ethical way.
We've broken the AI topic.
Sorry.
It could have been earlier. It could have been earlier, but it had to happen at some point. It might be worth us continuing with that for a little while. Is that something that others have thought about?
Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, Gaetan is absolutely right. Most certainly not just within EA, but companies all across the games industries, and I'm sure other interactive audio-related industries, from film to TV to VR to exhibitions, are all dealing with the same combination of technical possibilities, creative possibilities, time-saving possibilities, and ethical and legal and personal problems that come with this technology. And I think one of the interesting things to think about is that generative voiceover, where you've basically got a computer that's been trained on a large language model to create voices, is the first technological area where this has really become a big issue that everyone is looking at, that's both creative and ethical. But although it's the first, it's going to be the first of some more that are coming. And so I look at this that over the horizon there are probably other things where you are able to use generative AI as a tool to create things. But where should you do that? What possibilities will it have? And what are the ethical considerations is a hot topic. And just looking at that one, it's easy to see why it's attractive for all sorts of reasons. Whether it's when you're prototyping, it's incredibly attractive because you can very quickly create voices for your games that are both probably better than having me do scratch VO and reading lines off a script. And you can iterate on that, and you can try different types of voice out. You can do all sorts of things with it. But at the same time, there's an issue of, is it ethically okay to ship this in an actual game? Is it ethically okay to effectively put people out of work who are voice actors? Or will you be doing that? And what are the legal and ethical considerations? This is a huge area because you're talking about people's careers and people's lives. So we absolutely have to make sure that we look at that to balance the creative and production possibilities that it provides for us.
It's interesting, we've said ethical, and this isn't any slight on you, Gaetan said this as well, and I think I would about maybe 9-10 times so far just in this conversation, and it is one of the major sticking points right now, especially if you start to wade into the discussions that are going on around on social media about generative AI, large language models, that there is that worry about where's the data coming from, what are we doing with it, and this idea of we're doing it because we can, not because we should, which is always a concern for any technology. But I suppose there is this idea that, well, it's games. It's fine, it's not necessarily a big deal. It's just people playing games and making games. But of course, that's forgetting that games are such a massive part of the entertainment landscape now. And when you look at the revenue is always thrown around now that games are bigger than film and TV combined. And I think in some places you can put music in there as well, because of the sheer cultural dominance of the art form. There's a capacity here for not the wrong technologies, but technologies used in the wrong way to do damage to how we view art, in a sense, perhaps. What do you think, Isaac? Sean?
I think that Adam's really kind of hit the nail on the head with it. I think these sorts of technologies need to be considered in a capacity that works alongside not just the technical people who are implementing them, but also the creative people who are involved and potentially displaced during the process of the creation of that. You know, and we're seeing that play out in real time with things like, you know, actors unions and voice acting unions and that kind of thing, you know, having to really assert their position on how they see contracts playing out with the advent of generative AI models. And I think that it's important to make sure that dialogue is maintained and that people are happy with the direction of the technology and the ways it's being used. And that I think that it's one of these situations where you're not going to get a one-size-fits-all for everybody, especially from the point of view of someone whose voice is being replicated by some generative model. People will have different responses to that, and some people may be a flat-out, no, I never want my voice replicated by a generative model, and some people may be more open to it if, you know, there's certain things in a contract and stipulated. So it's one of these things I think we're going to see precedent unfold over time rather than trying to be able to predict anything.
Do you think it relies on the success of someone selling their voice? This idea of selling their identity in a generative AI sense, so you can buy, not time with them, but you can buy part of their character in a sense?
So far in my dealings with, you know, generative voiceover, it's not really using it to simulate recognizable people, but getting voices that you can use for a variety of characters, non-player characters, you know, any kind of character in the game. You can get an appropriate sounding voice that doesn't just speak the lines in an appropriate sounding voice, but can add the inflection and an emotional content and a sense of expressivity to what they're saying, which is where the technology is advancing really fast now. But so, I mean, there will obviously in certain situations, there will be situations where somebody who, you know, if you license Samuel L. Jackson's voice, and you go, great, I can have Samuel L. Jackson in my game for the right price. I imagine if he decided he wanted to do that, financially he'd probably be fine, because they couldn't get away with licensing his voice without him knowing about it. But for other people, you know, the voice actors out there who are making a living from doing voice acting for computer games, and many computer games, including, you know, Battlefield, will have dozens or hundreds of different voices in it. A BioWare role-playing game might have, you know, hundreds of different voice actors appearing in it, doing many different roles. And this is quite a big creative industry in its own right, the voiceover industry. And as the generative AI models get more advanced, there are going to be more situations where technologically you could go, it would be quicker for me and easier for me to do it with AI than to set up a recording session, work stuff out with agents, you know, all the overhead. It's very attractive to say, oh, that I could just do it the quick way. But when you get to the point of going, well, actually, am I putting this person out of a job? Am I effectively trying to hoodwink people into thinking it's a real person? And another aspect of this is that currently, you know, all the generative AI creative things that I see, you know, when you see all those, it's easier to talk about this in terms of visual, where people, you know, be doing generative AI art. It all looks like generative AI art. And currently, once you get used to it, the generative voices all sound like generative voices. They do sound very human, but after a while you get used to them, and you recognize them as not necessarily having the same full range. So to some degree it can be a little bit lazy as well to go, well, I'll just let the computer do it. And you may miss out on opportunities you would get with real creative people that you might not get if you just decide to go straight to the technological solution.
Is there an intentionality thing here, this idea of, well, when we get creative people, and that can include people doing very technical roles, but people working in the arts, working and creating things that are interactive and expressive, that something, not necessarily something human, but something quite magical happens where we're bouncing ideas off each other in a way that's far more unpredictable than a large language model, regardless of how much data it's trained on.
I think there's also an aspect to voice generating that opens the way we tell stories in game. You could still have, if we want to generate voices that react to thousands of situations that the player can find him or herself in, and you might want a group of people that are background characters that might talk about what happened in the game. You kind of need to generate this VO for it to be relevant to what happened. You can't possibly record that much. So I think there's a really interesting creative aspect on that front as well, where voice generation could be used, especially in games like RPGs or even sport games, where depending on how a match unfolded, you could have different thing that happens. So
obviously we know about this in terms of EA's titles for sports as well, the amount of lines that are there for commentary, it does start to lend itself for even generating temp content, as Adam was saying, before you go on to final content. Yeah, of course.
Flip side, just one thing that occurred to me, the flip side of what I was saying, and this relates to what Gaetan was saying, when I was working on Fable 3, you had many, many NPC characters, basically peasants and things you meet in various places. And of course, they're all supposed to be different peasants, and they're all supposed to greet you differently in different parts of the world. And the number of times when I, effectively teleport across the map to some place that's supposed to be 100 miles away from where I was, meet a completely different peasant, and they'd say hello to me, and I'd go, that's exactly the same sample I just heard over there. In that situation, I would get generative voice in there like a shot if I could, because that really irritated the hell out of me all the way through playing the game. It's that sample again, same again, over again.
So I was going to want to move us on from AI and generative things, but there's an interesting point there about you see something, it's like the British Transport Police, isn't it? See something that doesn't look right. This idea, you're playing the game, it might be a final release, it might be a build that's on the way to release, and you are seeing things or you're hearing things that are starting to annoy you that could be improved. What I wanted to discuss was where people with roles like yours in terms of audio programming, technical sound designers, where you sit in that process in the studio. So I alluded to the idea of whether technical sound design, technical audio design is the glue or whether it's something else. The programmers, are they creative through their code and creating tools? But I wanted to get this idea of, well, where do we sit as technical audio people within game development? And I guess within the context as well of hearing something that starts to annoy you.
I guess I can start off by saying I see my job as like a two-way street, because ultimately my customer is a technical audio designer like Gaetan, or a creative audio designer, and trying to find out what their needs are, what the needs that they don't know that they have yet, that they might not have thought about, and trying to have those conversations to make sure that I'm actually working in the right way on the right things, is a massive part of the job, because you could waste a lot of time writing something which actually has a terrible workflow for the person at the end of it. So I feel like rather than technical audio necessarily being the glue in that situation, I feel like it's more of a sort of there's definitely a flow down of technology of like code gets written, then there's a system which goes to technical audio, which then gets disseminated to creative sound designers. But in terms of actual design, I think there's also a flow up as well, and I think it's kind of like, yeah, it's not such a clean diagram of having. It's more of a hodgepodge of ideas that get thrown around.
I guess it's a bit like construction, isn't it? It's the idea of you've got people building the tools, making the tools, you've got people using the tools, but you've got architects in here somewhere that are designing the house, and it's being built at the same time. It's not necessarily a clear analogy of, you say that the information or the way it's moving, it comes down technology-wise and up design-wise, but sometimes it's the other way around, and there's a request for technology, or there is an idea for, well, you said that before, you gave a great example. We've got this technology which would fix your design issues for VO. So yeah, it could go both ways. Gaetan, I mean, how do you view your job?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because what I would do usually, there's many ways to solve problems in video games, in the engine we work in. There's a lot of logic that can be built in visual programming language, for example. And that's something that most of the time I can do as long as I have access to the right data. So if an audio designer or must-have needs something, a lot of my job is first to see what's available in the tool we have and see if ever I can sort of build it myself and solve it myself, because I know that software engineers have a lot of work and they're always really busy. So that's usually so that's usually when I sort of hit a wall, or I build something that is a prototype, but the workflow is really inefficient, or it's not optimized at all, resource-wise. Then I will go to software engineers and collaborate with them to make that workflow better. But yeah, that's most of how I see my job, really.
Is there a fundamental difference between you and the people doing the other jobs, doing the audio programming roles, or is it the levels of focus of what you're doing? You said you moved from a creative sound design background into this technical side. And I know when I meet people who are working in game audio, wanting to work in game audio, they aren't sure necessarily where to fit in that spectrum, from creating sounds through to building systems, through to writing code. Do you think that it's more flexible than it's made out to be?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to be really good at using the tools that we have already and try to understand them to the best I can. Software engineer actually can make new tools and make things easier for me to build what I need to build. So we collaborate all the time. I think, yeah, we have discussion about should that be in my realm or should that be in their realm, and often we start saying, oh, we need code support, and in the end we realize that maybe we don't. So
it's like calling it an airstrike.
Yeah.
But I think this is something that in over the history of game development has become, as this is something that's been continually happening, that actually you started off with, if you looked, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, you would have had almost quite rigidly defined roles between sound designers and composers and programmers. And over time, as a lot of game development has built more on engines with blueprints and schematics and visual programming languages and scripting and various levels of code writing that all contribute to the systems that allow you to create the sound that goes into the game. The technical sound design and audio software engineering have this bigger overlap in the middle, and that actually mirrors the fact that it becomes more of a relationship as time goes by between the two roles to go what is the vision that you are looking for, or that I've had an idea for, or that we think we might want, and what is the best way from amongst the sort of palette of things we have available to us to bring this vision to life. Do you need some low-level new code system? Do you need to build an entirely new tool? Or can you adapt or evolve or add a bit to what you've already got? Or could you create a script to automate this? All of these things, all these different areas are a toolbox spread between me and Gaetan that together allow us to build the things that allow us to make the sound in the games. And each new problem or each new creative possibility that we think of brings you have to look at it freshly and go, well, whose skills are going to be most needed to solve this? And one of the skills that we both need is to work it out between ourselves with each other.
And you talk about skills that were the case, or roles that were the case, this idea of this delineation between different roles, and quite strict delineations between roles, and about how that's maybe starting to change. And obviously we see this in the indie space, where really successful indie games weren't a thing 40, 50 years ago. I'm talking about the idea of games that are competing with AAA titles. You know, there have been titles that were made with small development teams. Look at Pokemon Red and Blue, right? So it's not a huge team, and it's an iconic game. But when we look at the actual, say, graphical and audio fidelity, or the quality of the player experience for audio, there are some incredible titles coming out now that are made with very few people. And I wonder whether it's that blurring of lines between the audio programmer, the designer, all these different things. So if we're then looking at skills going forward, when we're looking at the next wave of talent coming into the industry, I'm looking at Isaac here, even though Isaac's in the industry with us now, just because we're in this place. But what do you think we should be looking for, and what do people, when they're coming to us saying, I want to work with game audio, I want to work as a programmer, as a technical sound designer, what do they need to be doing?
Yeah, I think, as we're saying, it's going towards being, people tend to be more generalists than they were before. And, having the, coming from the almost course where we do lots of different, I do, the music stuff, and there's some like visual programming language stuff, and some physics of sound and things. And so knowing all those little areas, you don't have to be, when you're coming in, you don't need to be a super expert, but if you know the whole system, then you can really talk to anyone in the audio team, and who have a wide range of roles, and you can understand what they want, how to work with them, and you can become an expert from doing the work, I think. I think coming in, I was more, I knew a bit of different areas. I wasn't an expert in programming at all, but I've learned a lot in that one area, but because I had a general view of most of audio, I could work with a lot of audio people and learn lots from them. And as an audio programmer, making the tools and the engine for technical audio designs, I could understand what they wanted a lot better. So yeah.
I think it's also highly dependent on the size of your team, right? If you are as a studio that has one person working in audio as a sound designer, you will need to be a little bit more technical. If you have 20 person working in audio, you can afford to have more specialized people that might do one thing much better than anybody else. But that's not really a luxury you can afford if you have a smaller team, I think. So I think there's a space for both generalists and specialists. But yeah, in smaller team, generalists, I think are definitely valued quite a bit.
And if you're looking to explore what it might mean to try and have a career in game audio, it's there are all sorts of things out there you could be doing. Like if you design audio with the game audio engines that are out there, like Wise or Fmod, you will be, if you use those to create things, you are learning game audio. If you figure out how to code something that manages your wave assets, you are doing game audio. That's one's a code thing, one is making use of the tools that are out there. I mean, the wonderful thing about the tools that you can try they are industry standard things that we are all using. We on our game that we work on, we have a proprietary EA engine, but many other EA games will, for example, use Wise as their audio engine, and many games companies out there will use Wise or Fmod for either specific titles or throughout all the games that they make. And many of those using things like this is another way where you can decide to have a small team approach, where you might be less ambitious in terms of the range of things that you do in your game, but you can produce a fairly good result with a fairly small team. Or you can be more ambitious And then if you're being more, you've got a more ambitious vision with more complex sounds or crazy DSP effects, you might then need a larger team with specialists who know about these things, who can add to whatever is there. So if you've got any of those interests, whether it's technical, digital signal processing, creating tools, using things like Reaper to create audio, all of these are skills that you will use when you're doing game audio in one role or another. So it's quite easy to teach yourself a lot of those skills that will be attractive.
What I always find amazing is the amount of things that people already know from different parts of audio as well, especially within the Audio Engineering Society. People have an interest in audio for games, I would say, but when it comes to, let's say, their other experience, I've spoken to people who wonder whether it's transferable. And I mean, I'm of the opinion, and I think from what you've just said there, it's not necessarily about just learning one piece of technology, although that can be a way in, but that will teach you the concepts around. And it's the same with game engines, where you might learn Unreal or Unity, but you will learn the principles about 3D complex game engines that can work for proprietary tech as well.
We're all kind of like alluding to the fact, I think, that there's like this kind of spectrum that you can almost be on of just like various, are you good at these creative things? Do you have knowledge of these? How close are you getting to machine code with the kind of like logic that you're doing? Are you just using blueprints and kind of visual scripting, or are you writing C# or C++? Like, how far are you going to go down that avenue? And I think that there's ways that you can, like, if for anyone who's like kind of outside of the industry or feels like they're outside of the industry, looking in and trying to find where they fit in, despite the fact that there are delineations with job title, we're all kind of, getting to the fact really that it is a sliding scale for like, where you find your interest. And I think trying to follow where you find your interest is really key, because, you can make for yourself a really interesting and cool portfolio and never have to write a single line of code. There are tools out there. If you watch a few things, tutorials on Unreal Engine, and you can, start to make your own interactive environments, games, start to put your own audio into them, start to make your own systems if you're interested in those things. But you can kind of tunnel down into just the things which interest you, and kind of, present that in a really cool way to people who might be interested in the stuff you do, and learn through that too.
And that's from the individual side of someone looking to improve themselves, looking to ready themselves for industry. Now, obviously, we're here at the University of Surrey. This isn't necessarily directed at Surrey, but at universities and training providers generally. What are some of the things that universities and other training providers could do in order to nurture that developing talent?
I think it's a tough job, to be honest, to make a course, which, if you're already in a specialist course for something like audio, to stack game development effectively on top of that course, I think it's quite difficult, because it's quite a deep well of stuff, and there's quite a lot in there for you to make an interactive experience. So I think that, in terms of what can be provided within the context of a course that is already providing a lot of other things, to have this narrow track for game development, I think it does end up kind of almost out of necessity, because of just how much time and effort can be requested of students to put into those things. It narrows the kind of track of education that you can take with that. So I feel like that it's almost... There are courses that do explicitly game development out there, but maybe that doesn't interest everyone. Maybe they don't realise by the time they're starting university that's what they want to do, and they realise they want to specialise in the third year of doing something else that they wanted to do. But I feel like almost out of necessity, just because of the breadth and the amount of time it can take to, for different people to pick up different concepts and that kind of thing. I think that a lot of this tends to have to stray out into extracurricular time anyway. But I think that universities can do a lot in terms of just kind of introducing the concepts of game engines to people, and just getting the groundwork in there. Maybe keeping it programming light, and just keeping, to visual scripting languages like blueprints, and trying to maybe not so much try to make a video game, but just try to make an interactive experience, and just get those concepts laid down to people, I think would be the major thing that you could do within that time frame.
The practical evidence of that development as well. Yeah.
One of the things that I know about, music technology courses, when you see CVs from people who've been doing that, is you see people who've been using things like Max MSP and stuff like that. And that's basically a visual scripting language. It's not a visual scripting language that's used much directly in the games industry, but you're not a million miles away from stuff that is used in the games industry if you've used that. And so they're already, the things that you're being taught do already give you some skills that are useful. And one of the things that occurs to me as someone a long time since I've been at university thinking about stuff, but if you've got a university where you've got music technology or music courses like the ones Isaac's on, and you've got courses where people are actually doing video, computing or game development as a subject, then maybe there are more opportunities for them to collaborate with each other partially and have those people work together with each other, because the skills you need to create in game development, like many other things, are increasingly personal relationship collaboration skills. They are really important. I'm not an expert in loads of aspects of audio, and Gaetan is not an expert in C++ coding, and we've all got elements, but we need to work with each other to bring the best things out. And so if you want to get into game audio, then actually working with people who do games or do other computing disciplines is probably really useful, because you don't have to learn all the stuff that they know, but if you interact with those people and maybe collaborate on some kind of project together, I'm presuming that they must be if people are developing levels and they need audio for them, if sound is 50% of the experience, there's all sorts of opportunities for people to work together there. I don't know how you bring that out, but it seems to be a way that certainly some universities might be able to do more of.
I love that saying as well. It's almost tattooable, isn't it? Was it David Lynch was saying that sounds 50% of the experience?
It's one of those phrases that's been accredited to many people from Bill Gates onwards.
Any other thoughts on this about providers? Isaac?
I think something that maybe could be done is there's a lot of practical coursework surrounding maybe edit the sound for this film clip that's been set up for you, or compose this piece of music. So maybe something if there was like an optional module surrounding audio for games or something, you could have something already set up for you. You kind of same with as if you were working with a bunch of computer science or game students, where they've already set something up for you where you just have to do the audio and have that as like a starting piece, and you can go, oh, actually I really like this, or have that as the start of a portfolio or something. Or maybe if it's music, like compose something that works for a game rather than a static like 3-minute piece. Have something that's looping and then changes, and that could be put into a game and scripted rather than but yeah, I don't know how practical that would be, but it's just some ideas I thought.
I think the beauty is they don't have to be practical if you're not the one carrying them out. This is a message to those trying to prepare this next generation of talent, in a sense, to say, how can you start to think outside of the box? How can you start to take what you're already doing but bring it closer to what's there for industry? And I think it's something that we're interested in, this idea of how do you connect with education and back to industry? How do you make that gap smaller, essentially?
One of the things as well is like which road do you want to kind of take students down? Like we've alluded to the idea of that there's this kind of more creative area and there's this more technical area, and which area do you think that you as an institution should be pushing students towards? Because really, within restrictions and times and that kind of thing, you can only really kind of guide people towards one thing and let them find the rest out for themselves. But I wouldn't find it enviable having to find a marking structure for people making a video game. I think part and parcel of learning to make video games is making rubbish stuff that's broken.
You've seen my work then.
It's a huge part of the learning process is to make a load of stuff that doesn't work, or like it wasn't as fun as you thought, or like trying to build marking criteria around that learning process, I think would be quite tough to make sure it's fair to people, that they don't just hit it lucky with something that's really cool straight away.
It sounds like you're describing the process of, say, writing a musical or writing an album, a pop album, where you write 30 tracks and 20 of them are rubbish and you throw them away. And if you go and have a look at various artists, some of them turn into B-sides, but a lot of them are just left on the metaphorical cutting room floor. It's the same as filmmaking, of course. The scenes that are cut, which you think, why? So much effort went into this, but was it really any good, or did it fit the overall narrative? A bit different with games. I know what you're saying is sometimes it's experiments. Sometimes you try out a new thing and it doesn't work and you learn from it, of course. There's something I wanted to finish on, which was my closing question for this, which was the idea of, if you had a magic wand or something else, magical genie's lamp or something, if you could change one thing or fix one thing about game audio, it could be a technical thing, could be a creative thing, could be a logistical thing, what would it be?
Shall I go first?
Please do.
It's not exactly a technical or a creative thing that first springs to mind. One of the things that I often find myself realizing is I really like the sound of games, and when I play a game, I really like to try and figure out, how to make sure I hear it really well. And when I see the way that a lot of people experience game audio, it's often very far from the ideal for one reason or another. And I also think that we have a bit of, for what it might be a mixed metaphor, but an image problem of being able to communicate how good your audio can be if you have, whether it's having the right kit or even it's just, the good headphones rather than bad headphones, or all the way up to what, Atmos is capable of. And if I could change one thing, it's sort of like figuring out how to get that knowledge from in my head in a way so that people knew that game audio could be the thing that it is to me. Because I think a lot of people are sort of missing out on a really, an experience that's sort of half of what they could get.
It's very meta because you're doing it now.
Am I? Oh.
This is you getting it out of your head into the wider world. So
how am I doing so far? Oh, no,
thank you.
I'm not sure I want to know the answer to that.
I think, mine is quite similar in the sense that I think changing the way people consider audio, even within a game studio, like having audio really being at the beginning of the design process and really designing an audio experience as much as a visual experience, instead of stitching audio on top of a visual experience that has already been decided, is something that would really be great. I think it's a long process of advocating for it and being involved early, but it's a bit of a trope, but audio tends to be forgotten quite often, and I wish it wouldn't be the case, and we would be brought into discussions and have visibility on things much earlier.
It seems to be that it's because of the post-production process as well, the idea of you write the script, you shoot the script, then audio comes in at the last minute, then you do a colour grade and you're out. But this is something Rob Bridger writes about, isn't it? Leading with Sound, the idea of how early in the process can you get audio? How soon can you actually bring this in? Because the sooner you can bring it in, the better it is, not just for the end product, but also for just the emotions of the people who are working on the title in the first place. We get to be listened to sooner.
Yeah, and that means less throwaway work and a lot of things, and a better experience overall, so win-win.
Absolutely. Sean, what about you? What's your magic wand, one thing you'd like to see?
I would wave my magic wand into the past and take on all of the sort of butterfly effect temporal consequences that would ensue. I'd like to see what it would be like if we never stopped making sound cards for computers. And just like, the way that you would go out and buy like a chunky, expensive graphics card, like everyone went out and you had to buy the chunky, expensive sound cards to experience the best in game audio technology. And how differently would we be solving problems based on what kinds of hardware would be in those things? Some of the things that we look at now of spatial audio reproduction or even simulation of space, like you've got things like Project Acoustics from Microsoft, where they're doing this sort of offline baked wave simulation to do things like obstruction and reverb and sense of space around people, and there's other things that are doing more ray casts and that kind of stuff. Like if we had really kind of went down the avenue of having dedicated hardware for this stuff, what would that hardware look like, and how would it change the stuff that we're doing right now? I'd find that really interesting.
Just one interesting thing about all that stuff is actually each of those comes with its own you have different technologies have their own capabilities and their own constraints, and sometimes the constraints of the thing it does and doesn't allow you to do make the thing what it is. I mean, you only have to think about, people being really into chiptune now to realise how the very, very primitive technology for making audio in early games, PCs and early computers and games consoles, not only limited what you could do, but actually created a whole aesthetic, which is still something that people think about and create stuff in today. And so I think you would, if you could create those sort of different brands, each with their own approach to things, you'd get all sorts of interesting things like that.
I'm aware as well that someone will be watching this recording at some point who's the biggest fan of sound cards in the world, and they've just stood up and cheered in their office or in their home.
Someone's day, yeah.
There's will be one person there, or maybe more, but no, you raised a really valid point there, I think, about the idea of dedicated hardware and about what it might have meant or what it might mean in the future.
We're kind of seeing that now, right? PlayStation is kind of going down that route, and there's dedicated hardware within the console still, but I feel like we lost a bit of stuff in the middle somewhere. So.
Some
Dark
Blaster
Ages.
made a comeback. You never know.
Isaac, what about you, finally?
I think it'd lead on from what Sean was saying, and I'd love to see what happened with graphics, with ray tracing, but for audio, being able to have, maybe you could put this room in Unreal Engine as an asset, set the materials to wooden floor, set some acoustic panels around, and you should be able to play a sound in it, and it can work out what that should sound like and play it back to you, which obviously would probably require a lot of processing power, but if we still had sound cards in our PCs, then maybe that would be okay. But so something like that would be very cool, and that's what I'd like to see.
I think both of our points kind of link back to what Gaetan said, though, is that people have to really care about audio in the first place for those things to exist. So, maybe if your one comes true, then our ones can come true later down the line.
My modern version of that is graphics processing units do really, really fast, hyper-accelerated graphics. But if you want audio to go with that in the computer game, getting the information off the graphics processing unit back into your audio engine so that you can then do audio stuff is often a massive problem. And I've been in games where we've done these fantastic particle effects. Look at these amazing fireworks. They look fantastic. And you can have loads and loads of them on the screen and go, how do you get sound on them? And go, oh, can't you just make it happen? And go, no, it's all on the GPU. We don't know anything about what's going on.
We call it pressing the sound button, isn't it? The make sound button, if such a thing existed.
Yes, actually, that's the one I want. A big green make sound good button.
We start to be able to do that, so we are slowly taking over the GPU for audio processing.
Just beginning to get there.
I'd love to talk about this all evening. I think we could, especially with the idea of hardware and taking over what artists claim as theirs, we could be off on a wild chase here. But I think in terms of time, we should start wrapping things up. But thanks to all of you for your thoughts and predictions and hopes and dreams for the future of game audio technology. Thanks for those who joined us in the studio today, and those watching on stream or watching on recording. Thank you to the University of Surrey for having us, Russell Mason and the Tonmeister programme, and of course to Criterion Games for letting us out the studio, although it is the evening, we should be allowed to do what we want to come and do. And as well, the Audio Engineering Society for basically inviting us to come and take part. So thank you very much. I've been Alexander Horowitz, and good night.